So what I want to do, sorry, that was weird. What I want to do is to do a quick little video here about one of the more recent articles I just put up on my website, bikefitadvisor.com. And it's about picking bike seats. So if you've ever had trouble selecting saddles or ever struggled with your seat, some of this information might really help to make that process go a little bit smoother the next time, so you're not just taking guesses. So I've got just a brief little, I'm going to do like a little presentation here, possibly, if this shows up. There we go. Okay. So again, my name is John Wyeth. I'm a physical therapist. I've been doing bike fittings for almost 20 years now. Been a physical therapist for about the same. And what we're going to talk about is, just like I said, some steps to make the process of picking a bike seat a little bit simpler. Let me see if I can get this to advance. There we go. First of all, the biggest thing to know is that it's not about the saddle. I get a lot of people for bike fits every week, and they're convinced that their saddle is a problem, and most of the time the saddle is not the issue. Generally, the problems on the bike have more to do with other aspects of the bike fit. But that said, there are certain shapes of saddles that just will not play well with certain people, and so that's why it's still important that we go through some of these differences and try and figure out possibly what's gonna and narrow down what's gonna work best for you. Often I'll have people come in and they're married to a certain saddle. They will put it on all their bikes, and that's fine. That works, and that works great for them. That's perfect. Where we get into trouble is when they have a friend or an acquaintance that asks for a recommendation, and all of a sudden now this saddle is given to them as hey, this is going to solve all your problems. And it's my contention, actually, that it's much more likely that that saddle will not work well for that client. Sometimes we luck out, and that's great, but what works for one person has no bearing on it working for another. So we really need to come up with some individual restrictions and individual rules. So we had talked about different shapes. So we have kind of standard shapes, that's on the left here. We have a split nose design, which are becoming more and more popular, but also, we'll get into this maybe in another video, but also require a lot more attention to detail and how they're set up. And then we have split rail, or what we call cutout saddle, something with a channel in the middle there. So on this bottom right hand picture. So if we're talking about recommendations, there's really no silver bullet. And in these situations, coming up from an out of the blue saddle recommendation is pretty difficult. And so one thing is, information is our friend. So what type of information is useful in these situations? We're not quite there yet, but in general, what type of riding is being done, how experienced is the rider, how aggressively do they ride, are they big and tall, are they short and petite, have they tried other saddles, and how have these done, were they good, bad, and different to them, that sort of thing. When most of us get a saddle, most of us, our first saddles are selected for us because they come stock on a bike. And generally I tell people to try those out first, because at least if it doesn't work, then it gives us information potentially about that saddle. We can now eliminate some of the characteristics of that saddle from our lists. And now we're on this screen here where it says S-ometer, which is a lovely term devised for measuring sit bone width. Now, because one of the measurements we can get is the width of the saddle necessary. And they came up with these devices. You can see this is a specialized product where you sit on this, and it measures the distance between your sit bones. What the little triangles are for there. And in general, these provide very limited amounts of information. Why? Because width is just one of the measurements we need to know. There's length and the amount of taper, and there's not just width in the back of the saddle. And particularly, these are difficult to replicate exactly how we sit on the bike. And we really need to account for our torso position, because that's going to change the overall width of our sitting surface. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But you can make one of these. You don't need to go to a store. You can actually do this pretty easily. Anyone who lives near the beach can do it really easily. Or if you just get yourself a 10 or 20 pounds of sand is actually, which you can get, I think 50 pounds of sand for like $4, and about a 2-inch deep baking sheet. You can fill that baking sheet with sand and spray a little water on there to make it damp. And in just a pair of tights, not cycling shorts, but tights, you can actually sit on it and approximate your torso position that you ride in. So basically tilt your pelvis forward, make an impression of it. And you might need to try this a couple of different times. But if you do this, then you'll be left with an impression, and you can measure sit bone width from that. If you want to get a little bit more technical, you can take a little BB or a small bead and drop it into each side of the sand, and it'll basically each ball bearing, 2 of them will settle into the lowest spots on each side, and there you go. You can measure the width that way too. So you don't really need any special equipment like this assometer here. And it can at least give you some basic starting information. One of the, and this is, there's something wrong with the conventional wisdom for bike fitting and saddles. And the conventional wisdom is that women need wider saddles, men need narrower ones. And actually, this just isn't really true. Not even a lot of the time. If we look at the anthropometrics, which I can never pronounce that, anthropometric. So it's a measurement of the human individual for the purpose of understanding physical variation. So what this is basically, this is often used in the division of ergonomics, where they take thousands and thousands of people and measure all sorts of distances, things you couldn't even dream up most of the time. But one of the things they measure is sit bone widths, and they find that men, you can see on the screen here, men vary between 100 and 140 millimeters, women 110 to 150 millimeters. What this means is that there's 30 millimeters of overlap between the genders, and there's only 10 millimeters on each end. Basically, you could think of it as almost like the last one single standard deviation on the most extreme ends, where there's potentially, some discrepancy, some difference. And what this is you can see down in red there, the right way, there's a ton more variation within each gender. So there's more variation within all women, and there's more variation within all men than there is between men and women. So this idea that women are going to need wider saddles and men narrower, not really the case. So and going back to this, our torso posture, and the reason this is also there's many other complicating factors. First of all, our torso posture is what determines saddle width. It's important to note we don't actually sit on our ischial tuberosities or our sit bones, and that's what we often think of, and that's what people think you're measuring on that assometer. But we don't actually sit there. Here's a nice. Let me see if I can make that any clearer there. Okay, so here's a couple of views of the pelvis. This view is from the front, and I actually was in a hurry here. I wrote that wrong. On the right side, the top right picture is actually a view from the left. That's the left side of the pelvis. And now the one I want you to pay attention to is down here at the bottom. This is a view from underneath, as if we were looking from the ground up through the bottom of somebody's pelvis. And this is actually a male pelvis. You can tell by the shape of the outlet, and then in this top left picture, the inlet here, which is the kind of the upper ring, and essentially it's where a bunch of our organs rest. And you can tell the pelvis is more upright, though a female pelvis will actually lay out slightly more to the side through the top wings or our ilium up here. So down on this bottom picture, we see a black and a red mark on this side of the pelvis. Now, the black mark is our sit bone, our ischial tuberosity. And the red mark is actually our ischial rami. This is where we sit when we're sitting in a chair and we're, sitting upright, or we're slumping even, and our pelvis is tipped backwards. This red portion is actually where we sit when we're on a bike. When the pelvis tips forward, it rolls forward onto this section, this ischial rami. And so the more aggressive you are, the further forward towards what we call the pubic symphysis, which is right here in the middle, the further forward you sit. Now, the interesting thing is that this comes in at an angle. And with women, it comes in at an even more aggressive angle. So the further you tip forward, the narrower you're sitting, basically the portion of your pelvis that you're sitting on, the narrower it gets. And so that's another reason why we can't just blanket statement that women require wider saddles than men. So so the long story short, there's really no such thing as gender specific saddles. It would be nice, but unfortunately, it's just not that simple. So if we're starting with, and we want to basically set out some rules for selecting a saddle. Again, information is your friend. It would be great to know what has or has not worked in the past. It'd be great to know the type of riding you're going to do and that sort of thing. But again, yeah, having that history, that historical information about saddles can be really helpful. And incidentally, if you're ever trying to find a saddle, I always recommend to people to find old saddles you might have, find friends that have old saddles laying around, beg, borrow, and steal, saddles just to try out for a little while. And you might even find some bike shops do this where they allow you to borrow a saddle for, a ride or a couple of rides. You definitely need to do more than a parking lot test. So I generally will lend saddles out for even a week or two at a time so people can really put it through their paces and see if all the assumptions and all the decisions we've made have been accurate, and do we have it set up properly, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can avoid it, try not to buy saddles first, because it can be awfully expensive to guess like that. But let's say you're just trying to start out of the blue. What are some rules? I usually tell people to start with a standard shape, and that goes back to our traditional, let me see, I'm not sure if I can scroll back with the way this is set up. Our traditional shape, so no split nose design, no cutouts, anything like that. So incidentally, a cutout on a saddle doesn't really, they found, and I'll try and find the link to, there's a couple of research projects that study this. There's really no decrease in perineal pressure with them. And so it's not necessarily something that you should be making your decisions based on. If you have a saddle that has a cutout and it works for you, great. But it's not anything that they've proven is going to decrease perineal pressure and increase blood flow down there. So I usually tell people start with a standard shape. Second rule, really simple, is choose a saddle with plenty of flat sitting surface. And in a second here, I'll show some saddles on the live camera, and you can kind of see what I mean by flat sitting surface. But our pelvis, most of the time, most people are going to do better with a decent amount of flat sitting surface to rest on. And the third thing is the more aggressively you ride, the less padding is necessary. The main thing is because as you're riding more aggressively, you're pushing down on the pedals. That pushing down on the pedals exerts an equal and opposite reaction onto your body, and your hips and your rear end are actually lifted to some degree off the saddle, or at least decompressed just slightly when you do that. If you sit a lot because you ride more leisurely, you might want to gravitate towards something with a little more cushioning. So again, the less aggressive you ride, maybe perhaps the more cushioning you might need. And in the same vein, more padding isn't always better. A softer durometer of the saddle, meaning how squishy it is, can lead to this pelvis being a little bit more mobile and potentially a little unstable. And so we want to be careful about having it sink further in and weighting and pinching sensitive tissues. So we already got into why width, we do, want to consider width, but we really have to consider all these other things. So again, the more aggressively you're sitting, potentially the more narrow the saddle you might need on there. So let me come back here, and I'm going to turn on the live feed here. Let's see. And there we go. Okay, and so I'll just show you a couple of saddles when we're talking about flat sitting area. Here is Actually, this is one of the split nose designs. That's one of the things. And talking about a traditional saddle, you could, I was just mentioning, this does have a depression in here, but there's no full cutout anyhow. So coming back to here, so a lot of flat sitting surface. Now, if we were to look at this set, obviously you can see it's very flat all through here. These saddles, these split noses are quite a bit different though. They're not meant to sit back here, and we'll get into, we'll do this on another article and another video, but they're actually meant to be sat on way up here. This is actually where you contact it, so you can see the width that we're talking about. This is generally for a more aggressive riding position. This is a Pro Logo saddle. These are a little more contoured, and by contoured I mean there's this slope off of the side here. Let me see if I get the best angle to see. Yeah, that might be it right there. So you can see how it tapers off the edge there real quickly. But there's still some flat surface back here to rest on. A little bit more flat surface is this Physique. This is actually a time trial or triathlon saddle. And you can see there's a lot of flat sitting surface back here, although it is reasonably narrow, and the taper is a little less aggressive than on this Pro Logo. You can see how it kind of comes. This one definitely tapers quite a bit more quickly. This one has a more rounded profile through here. And let me see if I can find one more here. Okay, so here's two more. This is actually a good example. This is a mountain bike saddle. This is another Physique. Lots of flat sitting surface back here. Tons, in fact. You can definitely see all this area there. And then this is a much different saddle. This is not really. This is not a great comparison for all these things, but you can definitely see all the contours associated here, and for certain people this works extremely well. So again, to kind of recap, again, there are really no hard and fast rules about width. You're really going to some extent, we're going to have to take a lot more things into account than just when you sit on some device and it tells you how wide your pelvis is. There's a lot more to it than that. You really need to account for how aggressively you ride, what position you ride in, and that sort of thing. And then after that, my biggest, again, we talked about sitting, having a lot of standards, starting with a standard saddle, a lot of flat sitting surface, and then kind of customize the amount of cushioning to how you ride. So we'll get into more. There's gonna be a lot more of these types of videos, and we'll go into. And like I said, I will probably in the near future be doing a couple of different things, article and videos on this. If you want to read the article about this, it's pretty concise, and it shows some of the pictures that I used in that PowerPoint. You can take a look at them and dig into them a little deeper. But I'll put the link in the description below. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, comment below. Reach out to me on the website, bikefitadvisor.com, and subscribe if you'd like. Thanks.